Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 170.
When someone asks me, I always recommend to start with a CCNA routing and switching. I think this is one of the exams that I learned the most. It was my first certification, and I think I learned a lot from CCNA. The routing and switching important because this is the basis of everything else.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Yosef, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, Matthew. Thank you very much. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So good to talk to you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. For those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you and what are you up to in the Wi-Fi space?
So I'm a wireless engineer and consultant. Currently, I live in Hamburg in Germany. Originally, I'm from Israel. I moved here 3 years ago to Germany. And I started my own company. We do consulting for enterprises, customers regarding wireless technologies, starting with Wi-Fi, try to optimize the Wi-Fi networks, help customers to troubleshoot and train the teams to do that.
Very nice. So what size networks are you dealing with typically?
It is usually large enterprises, let's say anything between a couple of thousands and 10,000, 20,000 APs and some customers. And you have a lot of controllers, a lot of servers and backends, the whole network infrastructure as well. So it's usually they are huge networks. They have their own teams as well. And you come in as a consultant to help the teams to do a better job.
So are you coming into these networks from the beginning of the installations, or do you usually come in after the network has already been established for troubleshooting, etc.?
I wish I come to these companies at the beginning. I think every wireless engineer would wish that. Yeah. But I must say, the recent years, I find myself troubleshooting and optimizing current networks rather than building new networks, because everyone has certain Wi-Fi network, and in certain phase they grow and they don't really adapt the Wi-Fi networks till it's very crucial. So we do a lot of optimizing on current networks, and I don't remember my first project where I had a lot of greenfield, what we call.
Well, how did you get your start in Wi-Fi? You said you moved to Germany a few years ago. What brought you there?
Oh, my wife took me to Germany. She's German, and she said, I'm moving back home and you have to join. I say, okay, I don't have any other choices, so let's move to Germany.
Smart man.
And in Israel, back home, I started my career. Actually, things that many people don't know about me, I work around 8 years in hotels management, and at just one point decided to move to IT. And from there, I started working in one of the largest ISP/VAR in Israel. And there my journey with IT in general started.
Well, you told me a story that you actually got your start in IT because your CEO needed help with his Wi-Fi at home. Tell us that story.
Well, I guess everyone has a little funny story of his own. And I think my story was during my university studies, they asked me to help other bunch of smart guys to troubleshoot a problem at the CEO's house. And when the CEOs don't have Wi-Fi, you have to do everything to make it work.
Yeah.
So I was supposed to run a ping test, walk through the house, try to help the guys. And at a certain point, I moved to, I needed to approach the router. And sure, in every house, you put the router behind the TV because this is the best location that you can put it in. And not only they have a Wi-Fi keyboard, a wireless keyboard on top of the router. At the moment I moved the keyboard away, my ping started looking good, and I said, "No, it can't be. It's just I didn't know anything about Wi-Fi back then." I moved the keyboard back to the router and move it away, and everything works fine. And I think this is the magic of Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you were like, something's going on here. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to dig deeper, and thus your Wi-Fi career began.
Yeah.
So if you could go back to the beginning and give yourself some advice, what would you What would that be?
I would say I did a lot of experience comes from trial and error. So I did a lot. Maybe this slowed me down a little bit, trying things on your home lab or somewhere else. But learning from your experience is really, really important. Today, when I look back, because I started in security and networking, I think this was a huge contribution to my Wi-Fi career, just to have this knowledge in the background. And I wouldn't do it different. I think this is the experience, and this is how our experience shape who we are, right?
Yeah, that's great. So, what other things do you think you did well that you might you think is worth learning?
Well, you need to keep, I think, just keeping your mind open when you troubleshoot issues, and especially in the Wi-Fi environment, we have a lot of other factors that we need to consider. And keeping your mind open regarding other things like the network infrastructure or security, firewall rules, all the other stuff around, sometimes even cabling,
Yeah.
You can't imagine how important the cables are. If the cables are done wrong, your Wi-Fi won't work. At the end, we are attached to cables. So keep your mind open when you start your Wi-Fi career. And
Yeah, that's good. So is there a class or certification you think everyone should go through?
definitely, just because I said that before, I believe everyone in the Wi-Fi community, Wi-Fi industry, should start with the routing and switching background. It's
Okay.
So when someone asks me, I always recommend to start with a CCNA routing and switching. I think this is one of the exams that I learned the most. It was my first certification, and I think I learned a lot from CCNA. The routing and switching important because this is the basis of everything else. And on the Wi-Fi side, I would recommend everyone to do the CWNA certification. CWNA is, because it's the natural non-vendor related program.
Yeah.
It teaches you how Wi-Fi works. So it teaches you how things should work and not how to configure stuff. So when you approach a vendor device later on in your career, you know how the technology works, and you need to fit yourself into menus or command line interface or other stuff, but you'll find your way.
Well, that's cool. So if I understand, you're saying you lay that nice foundation of networking and then move on to how RF is actually working, and those two fundamentals really set you up for success.
Correct. I think it's all related to each other.
So
Yeah.
how do you continue to invest in yourself as a WLAN pro?
Wow. After passing the CCIE 3 months ago, I decided to have a break, right? And say, okay, now let's focus way more on family, because I still need to
Yeah,
pay.
your wife wanted you around.
Yeah, and I need to pay them time, and I thought I will stop for a few months, but honestly, I couldn't. And I started my CWDP. I did the CWDP a few weeks ago. I just
Oh,
passed it.
wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. And aiming also to get to the WLPC. So this is kind of invest in yourself by attending to conferences, doing more learning and other stuff. I mean, one of the most important stuff also to learn other technologies as well. Beside Wi-Fi, we are in the Wi-Fi domain, but there's a lot happening around us. There's technologies like LTE, like LoRa. There are really advanced technologies that, as Wi-Fi engineers, we should have a look into these technologies, learn them deeper.
Yeah, I guess making sure you're staying current with what's happening in the related fields as well.
Yeah. Well, at the end, we deal today. We hear, everyone hears about IoT, and we talk a lot about IoT. But honestly, till 2-3 years ago, it sounded like just a buzzword.
Yeah.
When you start touching the other technologies, you understand that you can make these buzzwords as reality. So IoT is there, and we need to deal with it.
Now, you had talked about the CCIE. What was that process like for you?
Well, the CCIE is a really interesting track, and I say that now. If you asked me a few months ago, I wouldn't say that, but I think it took me around 3 years to finish my CCIE. I did so you have to do the written exam, and the written exam will test your knowledge on technology. So it's more theoretical knowledge.
Okay.
But I took kind of a 1.5 year break in between the written exam and the lab exam. And it took me 3 tries to pass the lab exam. It was really, really tough.
Wow. So what was it that really helped you or caused you to be able to finally achieve that certification?
I think one of the biggest advices I'm going to say now for everyone or anyone who's trying to attend to the CCIE, take your time, and you should have enough time to study, enough time. I don't think that you're going to pass at the first time. So it's, we have the expectation, we're going to pass at the first time, and you hit the exam and you get your first shock because of the amount of time, and everything is under stress. So you have to do it really, really fast. And this was my mistake doing my CCIE. Got there, thought I'm going to have the first try done, but it didn't.
Wow. So, but you didn't stop. You just keep going, keep plugging away.
Yeah, don't stop. Just don't stop.
Well, now you're CCIE. Is there anything in the Wi-Fi industry you're seeing now that you wish you could change or stop from happening?
Well, I still see, unfortunately, that the industry is still hiring non-professional, and I think it's right for any industry. But we see that a lot in the Wi-Fi world as well. Non-professional people providing non-professional product at the end. I hope that people spend more time on learning what they do and provide better solution, better products, especially regarding Wi-Fi deployment and Wi-Fi design. You see every day you see a bad PHY every day. And
yeah, I guess especially in your world where you're going into these other situations, you're going to see a lot of things.
Yeah, even in huge networks, you see a lot of bad PHY, which is surprising. You think that in big companies, large enterprises, they should do it better. And you go out there, maybe the design is good, but the installation is bad. So you always see some kind of bad PHY. And I hope this will stop one day.
Well, what are some of the common or ongoing mistakes that you're seeing most often?
Yeah, well, I have two big major issues with that. One of them is, I call it a green maps, actually, that green maps looks good. Everyone say it's okay. Green is okay. So sometimes the customers don't have the deep knowledge to understand these maps, and presenting green map will give maybe a wrong feeling that everything is okay. And the second thing, I think, you still see people think of Wi-Fi like or wireless access point like light bulbs, and they install it, and somehow it's going to get there, right? Without a lot of thinking, without choosing right antennas and such stuff.
Well, I guess that's why you're there. You've got your company to fix all those things. Speaking of, is there any project or thing that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, a lot of projects, actually. I need to choose one, but I think the U21 Champion League in Israel back in 2013, it was my first experience doing Wi-Fi for stadiums. It was amazing. Because you don't see these things every day. You don't see this kind of coming from the enterprise world and coming to stadiums. It was a great experience. Everything is under stress, and the Wi-Fi deployment should be different. It's you build smaller cells, and you need to be very, very, let's say, sophisticated where you place your access points in order to get the coverage where you need it. And I think it was a really nice experience doing this.
Well, that is cool. What about mistakes? Anything that mistake you made early on that taught you something valuable?
No, not at all. I mean, we don't do mistakes, right? We do.
Exactly.
Let's call it self-teaching experience or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah, but one of the stories, I traveled to a different country to do a site survey for one of my automotive customers. Arrived to the site, everything's nice. I take my rigs out, connect all my Wi-Fi gear, and I found that my PoE adapter was doing a short on the mini PC that I use for throughput test, and this was shortening the access point as well. And I think, you can't do anything. You're in the middle of nowhere. You have to find solutions. The customer is not happy. So, lesson learned. Whenever I go to site survey, I check my gear a day before, connect everything together, and run it,
Take extras.
Just run the equipment, see that it works.
Yeah. So what did you end up having to do? Start the next day, or What was the solution?
Actually, we found a really long power cable, and the customer was so nice. So he gave me another laptop, and we installed an iPerf on that laptop. And we figured it out. It took a few hours, but the whole project was delayed like half a day. It wasn't that bad, and it was Spain, so it's nice to be stuck in Spain.
There you go. So check the gear and work with really nice customers. That's the best advice.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, any other parting advice you'd give to someone who's starting out and just really wants to build a strong wireless LAN professional's career?
I would say have your own lab and test things. So don't wait for your boss or your superior or someone to tell you what to do. If you read a piece of technology, try to test it in your lab. And it's easy to get today a home lab, so just test things and don't wait for other people to tell you. And sometimes we take things as granted, so I like to take those things and retest them. Sometimes my test is bad, but sometimes I learn a lot through this process of testing stuff.
That's good. Any favorite equipment you're using these days?
Favorite piece of equipment, I would say my NetScout, the G2. Actually, it's really handy. I use it a lot because it's easy to power it up and to start your own test if you save the profiles in it, and you can test your end-to-end, let's call it, connectivity in a very quick time. I use a lot of Ekahau for site surveys as well. I think both are my favorite piece of equipment. I still didn't get a Sidekick though, but hopefully I will have it in the near future.
Sounds great. So, Yosef, thank you for being here. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's Yosef Graziano, or Graziano Yosef as it's written. And I'm an email guy for business stuff, but you can find all the details on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks, Yosef. We'll talk soon.
See you. Bye-bye.
10 Talks.
I'm Josh Halley. I'm a solution architect with Cisco. Working in CX, which is a project team. We do different projects around Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Russia. Presentation I have today is to talk about how not to actually do a BLE survey. The reason why I have the word not here, and this is probably the biggest question about this presentation, why are you presenting how not to do a survey? This is definitely not a fantastic way to do things. Don't get me wrong. But it's one of the best ways that we have today to actually achieve our goals. So the type of site surveys which I'm targeting, I'm looking at in the context of BLE is proximity location. How do you make that measurement, identify that sweet spot to ensure that the proximity location beacons trigger your application, trigger your system to notify you of something without making the reach too far or having it trigger within the wrong location. The foundation for this is actually having the right components. So to get started out, number one, you need Wireshark. Sounds messy already, right? You need a BLE sniffer. And you need a reference device. You need to understand what is the likely RSSI which is going to be received from the client device in comparison with your sniffer, which you're using to measure and identify your particular RSSI average within a particular location on your map, and clearly a floor plan to scale with the right measurements. Now, the adapter which is depicted here, as you can see, it's a lot of circuit board, but I tested various different types of adapters, and this one was relatively stable and was able to provide us with a consistent experience in the context of measuring BLE packets. If we look at the different types of frames, depending on the vendor, depending on the BLE type of beacon, I was working heavily with battery-powered beacons for some of my projects and deployments. They send different types of packets. You've got your connectable packets, which are being transmitted from your BLE beacons, which allow an end device to potentially connect up. Then you have your non-connectable packets, which here are depicted under ADV non-con. And you're going to see these different packets and some of the traces, which we're going to get to. So understanding the types of packets associated with the beacons you're using, regardless of which manufacturer it is, understanding these attributes will help you understand how do I work out where my beacon is within my location, and how do I find that sweet spot to be able to say this is the starting point and this is the end point of where my device will trigger based on an application recognition. So the different values that we look at here, we've got an attribute which is the UUID, the universal unique identifier, and this identifier is used to distinguish typically a beacon from a manufacturer with a variable field that you can change to match your respective organization. So when you're deploying your beacons throughout a location, you'd be using the UUID field with the marker matching your installation for the different beacons which you decide to deploy throughout your site. Further to this, you've got other variable attributes that you can change. You've got the major fields and the minor fields. A major field you would typically configure for a floor or location. The minor fields would be a per device attribute, so you can recognize beacon 1 versus beacon 2. On an application level, things get more detailed depending on what type of application you're using. Are you using an iPhone or an Apple-based context application? For them, they use what's called nominal distance, and within that API, within the program, you can use nominal distance to somehow, within the application, trigger on what RSSI it's going to kick off and provide you with a notification. In my experience, you want to go with a hard RSSI and testing manually, because how it's going to trigger based on your iPhone, based on your different devices, and through that API, it's always a little bit dubious. So how do we actually do this? As I mentioned, we have to have a look at the packets. So you want to understand what type of frames are you receiving, and how are those frames put together. I've seen all sorts of weird beacons out there from different manufacturers, some which are using the same MAC address regardless of how many you order. Makes it a little bit difficult to determine which device is where and also use your traces to identify them. So to get around this, you want to use the characteristics that you know. If they only send out ADVINVs, use that as your capture attribute to work out these are our beacons and not something from a third party. It's quite common from all manufacturers that they've got some level of beaconing within their APs, and this can mix up your results if you're not filtering correctly. Okay, so understanding these details, understanding the addresses, this is key in being able to determine what characteristic am I going to filter on. Now, applying these filters, in my experience, because you're actively surveying using Wireshark, some of the nice tools that we have out there, you have to rely on looking at the live Wireshark traces to see what's coming through. So if, for instance, I have 2 or 3 different beacons within my area and I want to work out their respective RSSI, I mark the different characteristics, UUID, major, minor, or the respective to address, assuming that it's present, and then use that as a characteristic to say, okay, this is beacon 1, this is beacon 2, this is beacon 3, and I color them accordingly using rules within Wireshark. So I have my capabilities to configure my different filters based on these different attributes, but sometimes it's not enough. For instance, if an application is programmed to always use the same UUID, major and minor fields, then you're kind of stuck. You don't have much else to go on. So as a result of this, you may need to dig deeper into your packets and apply filters basically directly on the data fields. So you've got your data fields here within your actual beacons, and you can use those fields and select those specific fields when you're surveying to measure the different devices and understand where your different mapped beacon or respective RSSI is coming from. Within Wireshark, there is the concept of what's called a dissector, which allows you to basically translate the different data fields based on bytes and everything else. You can customize this, and there's nothing stopping you from doing this, but in this context, I'm showing you the raw fields, which you basically pick up from the beacons which you're using from whatever manufacturer, and then you can build your dissectors or whatever else as you may need them. So looking here, an example of some of the results which I gathered. So basically, we can see different beacons based on different colors and the respective RSSI which was received from each one of these beacons, and the fantastic way, which we use to actually work out where the good and bad locations are on your map. is based on basically manual notation. This is my beacon number 1. I'm receiving an RSSI of 61 to 65 in this location. When I stand there, that's my average, base between there. 67 to 69 when I move a few meters across. So we need to keep in mind, you'd never do something like this for a Wi-Fi installation. We've got better tools for this. But given the limited resources and capabilities that we have for BLE, this is one method that you can potentially use to work out where will my beacon trigger and where will it not. We've seen proximity used heavily in museums, in art galleries. They put a beacon behind a painting and then you get a notification this painting was from this artist or whatever else. But working out that sweet spot, at the moment, there's not a large array of tools out there which actually provide this information. Now, one last thing, I'm almost finished, sorry, is we have had scenarios where the beacons, no matter what you do, they're still way too strong. So you have to manually attenuate them. This is the method, old trusty, yeah. So basically that's it. It's not a fantastic way of doing things, but sometimes your hands are tired. It does work. It involves a bit of work and packet sniffing, but ultimately it brings you to the goal that you want to reach.
How do you tie your location to the chunk of Wireshark frames?
So basically, within Wireshark, if you right-click any frame, you have the capability of adding what's called packet comments. So while I'm walking around the floor and I find this particular frame, okay, it's a minus 67, I'd add a packet comment when I arrive at that location. And then again, when I change location again, I'd add a separate packet comment. Exactly, so in that packet comment, I know from here onwards, this is location 1. From the next point onwards, it's location 2, and then start looking through the Wireshark capture at the end of the packet comments to see, okay, this was associated from location 1 or location 2, and so forth.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.